Today we are in Hudson, Ohio at the Old Hudson Township Burying Ground, just a few blocks away from town center. In this cemetery we have burials of people who fought in the Revolutionary War, soldiers who fought in the War of 1812, and we also have the grave of the founder of this town, David Hudson. In fact, this site is the original site of David Hudson's apple orchard. This is the grave of Ruth Brown. Ruth was the burying ground's first resident when she was buried here on December 13th, 1808. And Ruth's husband, Owen, was buried here in 1856. Owen was a dedicated civil servant and was integral to the early growth of Hudson. Squire Brown, as he was called, was the third wealthiest man in Hudson in the 1830s and was famed for his resourcefulness, energy, and he had a severe stutter. Owen is perhaps best known, however, as the father of American abolitionist leader John Brown, the same John Brown who led the ill-fated attack on the United States Armory at Harpers Ferry, Virginia in 1859. Owen Brown was born February 16th, 1771 in Torrington, Connecticut, to Revolutionary War Captain John Brown and Hannah Owen. A lifetime admirer of the Founding Fathers, Owen's first memory was of the departure of his father's militia company to engage the British in New York during the summer of 1776. Unfortunately for Owen, this first memory would be the only memory of his father, who passed away September 3rd, 1776, due to a prevailing epidemic that swept through the Continental Army. With the family in dire financial straits, Owen was sent to live with various relatives and friends. Ultimately, Owen Brown was sent to work at a young age. He was trained as a cobbler and worked farming local fields in the summer and making shoes over the winter. When Owen was 22, he married Ruth Mills in February of 1793, and together they had 8 children. Their first child died before turning 2. They soon after moved to a saltbox-style home on the rocky countryside of Litchfield County, where on May 9th, 1800, John Brown was born. In 1805, the Browns left the rocky soil of Connecticut for the more fertile fields of Hudson, Ohio. The Browns were joined in this migration to Ohio by thousands of other families. Owen became a wealthy cattle breeder and operated a successful tannery. Ruth Brown died in December 1808. Owen Brown married Sally Root in 1809 and had 8 more children. Owen himself was deeply rooted in the abolitionist movement. He was personal friends with leaders such as Frederick Douglass, who often stayed with the Brown family when he was lecturing in the area. Owen, in collaboration with David Hudson, established one of the earliest way stations along the Underground Railroad and personally arranged passage into Canada for many escaped slaves. In the 1840s, the town began to divide philosophically regarding slavery. Owen was not a centrist. He and many abolitionists like him had strong personal beliefs regarding slavery and a strong will. This philosophical rift came to a head, both religiously and educationally, under Owen Brown's watch. So the religious rift started here, the building behind me. We're at the corner of Main and Church Street, and this is the original location of the first Congregational Church of Hudson. Now, this is not the original building. This is just the original location. The original building was a wooden building that was torn down and moved to the eventual permanent home. But this location is where the original first church of Hudson stood. This is the church where Owen Brown and his family congregated at until they decided to uproot their family religiously and move. More about that in a minute. This is the very site where in 1837, Owen Brown stood up in front of the entire congregation and pledged his fidelity to the abolition of slavery. In fact, in his speech, he vowed to pledge the remainder of his life to the destruction of slavery. And while it was largely united in its anti-slavery attitude, this church, or the church that stood on this site, was split. The split had to do with whether slaves should be immediately emancipated, or if free slaves living in the North should be sent back to Africa. In other words, the members of the congregation who were in this building, who were on the side of emancipating all slaves, wanted all slaves free. But there were those, the other half of this church, where they agreed that slavery was a universal thing and the people who currently owned slaves should be able to keep their slaves, but that free slaves should not be enslaved again, but should instead be sent back to Africa. In 1842, this divided opinion led Owen Brown and others to leave the first Congregational Church and establish a new church called the Free Congregational Church. This building was originally a 2-story building. It was transformed into a 3-story building by lifting the original church and constructing the first floor below. So the top 2 floors of this building are the original location of the Free Congregational Church. Owen Brown paid to have the original 2-story building constructed for the congregation, whose members had to swear they would fight against slavery. It was at this location in the summer of 1859 that John Brown made his last appearance in Hudson on his way to Harpers Ferry. This is where the educational rift occurred. Owen was a founding trustee of Western Reserve College and is credited for securing its location in Hudson, as well as overseeing the construction of its first building. During Brown's tenure, Western Reserve was known as a hotbed of abolitionist ideals. But in 1833, after the death of the institution's first president, the university elected a more conservative president in an attempt to distance itself from the politics of slavery. Deep divisions developed between abolitionist faculty and colonizationist administrators. In 1835, Brown resigned his position and joined a large contingency of faculty, staff, and students of the Western Reserve College and moved his allegiance to Oberlin College, where Owen served as trustee from 1835 to 1844. The rift proved costly to the Western Reserve College when abolitionist donations suddenly started going to the more definitively abolitionist Oberlin College. Even so, the Western Reserve College graduating class of 1854 made national news when it voted unanimously, and against the wishes of college leadership, to invite former slave and noted abolitionist Frederick Douglass as commencement speaker. Douglass accepted and drew thousands to his July 12, 1854 speech, in which he spoke in seeming amazement at the historic nature of the students' invitation and the moral courage of those who extended it. There isn't much documentation about Owen in his later life, except for the occasional pen letter to his son John. When John was in Kansas, John was trying to deliver Kansas to the non-slavery side, and things got a little bit testy in Kansas for everybody on both sides. Skirmishes broke out, certainly bloodshed, and certainly some death involved. Owen died at the age of 85, just 3 years before his son's attack at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. Part of me wonders how Owen would have felt about that. Owen was an old man. I doubt he would have been part of the skirmish itself. Now, although Owen was not as radical as his son, he had a firm belief that nobody should be enslaved, and all men are equal in the eyes of God. Thanks for joining me today, folks. Hope you're all well. I appreciate you coming to the videos. Leave a like and subscribe if you choose to. That'd be great. And please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. All right, I'm off to my next adventure. Take care. He was trained as and while it was largely, even so, the Western Reserve College graduating class of 1854 made national news when it voted unanimously and against the wishes to invite former slave and noted good timing.